So I want to talk a little bit about the final sections, the second half of your capstone project. So for the project proposal and literature review, you put together maybe the first half of the paper, maybe a little less than the first half of the paper. So the introduction, a couple pages where you connect yourself to the phenomena that you're studying. You can open up with an anecdote, do something a little bit creative. The literature review is a section where you show that you did your homework, that you learned a little bit about this topic, and you came up with a research question that's out of the literature, informed by the literature. And then a method section where you are applying content analysis to that phenomena that you're looking at. You're talking about the artifact that you're going to study, how you're going to go about studying it, the different processes that you went through to do your project. Beyond that, what's the paper? Like, what are the other sections of the capstone project? So that's what this is about. And I'm going to use this little, this is my PowerPoint slide, poor man's PowerPoint. The first section after your methods section is your findings, also called your results section. The findings are what you found. So you come up with a method, you wrote your methods section, explained how you went about doing your project, and then the findings are, all right, what did you find after you applied content analysis to that TikTok video, to that Twitter feed, or whatever it is that you're taking a look at? What did you find? There are a few different ways to go about organizing the information in your findings section. So you can, if it helped you to identify larger categories like positive, negative, offense, defense, however you're going about organizing the bigger categories for your project. If that's what you started with, you could begin with positives. And then within the positives, there's individual codes or categories that you might have within that. So you get that section out of the way, and then you do another section. Something that's kind of helpful for writing a findings section is to include an opening paragraph that explains how the information is organized and what you're going to be doing in the findings section. You're going to be quoting from your research participants if you did a qualitative project. You're going to be using quotes from TikTok, Twitter, Instagram. If you're looking at social media, if you're looking at letters or documents, you're going to explain how you're going to quote information from those documents and materials to support your findings, to help flesh out those categories that you found. So you can do that by looking first at the big categories, and then what were the smaller categories within that. Or you can go about it a different route, which is you had a bunch of codes, you applied a bunch of codes. Are there ways to group those codes? Like there are 3 or 4 codes that are talking about the impact of what something said, something someone said on Twitter or wherever. Maybe there were 2 or 3 codes that were, you can say that they're grouped by, they're talking about underlying issues that led to the problem that you're researching. Are there ways to group those individual codes? So start with the big categories or start with a bunch of codes. But either way, you're going to need to be able to group that information and to go from idea to idea and transition. Doing that, thinking through that grouping is going to help you transition from different sections within the findings portion of your paper. Once you're done with the findings, analysis. You interpret. And that's where I think English and humanities students are really going to shine with this kind of project, because the findings and coming up with the findings might be a little weird. You're using a very different approach that you've probably come across in the English department. It's still a method of analysis that's used in the humanities and communication studies, and some folks in the social sciences, but it's a bit different. Where I think you guys can kind of take over and do a really kick-ass job is in the analysis. You interpret. You talk about what you learned. You can talk about what surprised you. You can talk about the different trends that you thought were interesting, but you're talking about what it is those findings, interpreting them, and talking about why they're significant, they're important, how they help you answer your project's research question. Finally, we have discussion. You're discussing your project in light of the literature review that you put together. So now that you've done this research, now that you have some findings and you have some analysis of those findings, how does that speak to the literature that you found earlier in your literature review. What does it contribute to the research? A few other things that you can do in the discussion section. You could also write a conclusion section that does some of this as well. I tend to lump everything together in the discussion section. You can talk about limitations to your research. You only had a certain amount of time. You only had enough resources to look at X number of comments on a particular post or what have you. But again, the time thing is really what's probably limited folks the most. And that's fine. There's always some kind of limitation to research. You can't do everything. So you're going to talk a little bit about what some of those limitations are. You could also talk about what future research should look like. So maybe saying that I think research in the future should take up this issue and look for it in other places, whatever you think that future research should look like. So that's a quick overview of the three sections of the capstone paper that we didn't talk about all that much, or we maybe didn't talk about all that much in the first half of the class, but now you have a little bit of information to go on. If you have questions, if you want to talk about how this relates to your particular project, or if you think that there's things that are going to be hard for you to, it maybe doesn't exactly fit with what you're doing, speak up and let me know. But that's it for now.